The history of the first black people in America is an intricate and evolving narrative that spans centuries, involving migration, enslavement, struggle, and contributions to the nation's foundation. The first African presence in America predates the establishment of English colonies in what is now the United States. In fact, African people were involved in the early exploration of the Americas. One of the first recorded Africans in the New World was a man named Juan Garrido, who arrived in the Americas around 1513. Originally from West Africa, Garrido came to the Caribbean and then joined Spanish explorers in Florida. He is also credited with helping introduce wheat to the Americas. Similarly, Estevanico, an enslaved Moroccan Berber, became one of the most notable early Africans in what is now the southern United States. He was a member of an expedition led by the Spanish explorer Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca in the 1520s, and is regarded as one of the first Africans to explore the present-day U.S. Southwest. The significant African presence began during Spanish and Portuguese explorations in the 16th century. Africans, both free and enslaved, were brought to Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America long before the British established colonies in North America. The early contributions of Africans in Spanish territories set the stage for the later development of slavery in the English colonies. The first documented arrival of Africans in the English colonies of North America occurred in 1619. A group of approximately 20 Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, aboard the White Lion, an English privateer ship. These Africans were captured from a Portuguese slave ship and traded for provisions by the English. Although their exact status is unclear, it is believed that they were treated as indentured servants, similar to many poor Europeans who came to the colony under contract labor agreements. However, unlike white indentured servants, these Africans had limited prospects for freedom. This event in 1619 marked the beginning of a systemic process of African enslavement in the English colonies, though slavery was not yet a formal institution at that time. Some Africans were able to gain freedom after serving a period of indenture. For instance, a man named Anthony Johnson, who arrived in Virginia in the early 1620s, eventually gained his freedom, acquired land, and became a successful farmer. However, the gradual codification of racial slavery in the late 17th century significantly changed the lives of Africans and their descendants in the colonies. As European colonization expanded in the Americas, so did the need for labor. The cultivation of cash crops like tobacco, sugar, and later cotton required a large, inexpensive labor force. Indigenous populations, initially enslaved by Europeans, were decimated by disease and violence, leading European colonizers to turn to Africa as a source of labor. The transatlantic slave trade became the main mechanism for the forced migration of Africans to the Americas. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly taken from their homelands and transported across the Atlantic Ocean in what became known as the Middle Passage. The journey was brutal, with mortality rates as high as 20% due to the inhumane conditions aboard the slave ships. Africans were packed into the ships with little room to move, and diseases spread rapidly, leading to the death of many before they even reached the Americas. The slave trade was driven by European powers, including Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands, all of whom established trading posts along the West African coast. Africans were captured or sold into slavery by other Africans, often as a result of warfare or raids, and were then sold to European traders. These traders transported them to the Americas, where they were sold at auctions and put to work on plantations, in mines, and in households. The arrival of Africans in the British colonies, especially in the southern colonies, rapidly increased during the 17th and 18th centuries. By the mid-18th century, the African population in the American colonies had grown significantly, with enslaved Africans making up a large proportion of the labor force, particularly in southern colonies like Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia. Some engaged in acts of everyday resistance, such as working slowly, sabotaging equipment, or feigning illness. Others ran away, seeking freedom in the wilderness or in communities of free black people, Native Americans, or sympathetic whites. A few, like those involved in the Stono Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina, participated in armed revolts, though these were often met with harsh reprisals. Enslaved Africans also preserved their cultural traditions, which helped sustain them through the hardships of slavery. They retained elements of their African heritage, including music, dance, spiritual practices, and languages, blending them with European and Native American influences to create new cultural forms. These cultural traditions, particularly music and religion, played a crucial role in the development of African American identity and would later influence broader American culture.